So it's the 30-year anniversary of the British Acupuncture Council next year, and I thought it'd be nice to hear from a variety of our members about their life in practice and their thoughts and philosophies. And I'm very fortunate to be joined by Volker Scheid. I was lucky to study herbs at Westminster when Volker was teaching, and I got a lot more than just a herbal medicine course. I feel that a lot of the ideas that I learned when I was learning with Volker were incredibly important for me in my formation as a practitioner. And so I really wanted to give Volker an opportunity to talk about some of these ideas today, so people who might not be exposed to his ideas can benefit from them and can find further reading if they want. So, but before we get started, Volker, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about your development as both a practitioner and an academic.
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me for this conversation. I'm obviously been involved with the BAcC long before it became the BAcC. It was still the traditional acupuncture society for my side of coming into Chinese medicine, and I've been involved with EJOM, European Journal of Oriental Medicine, which I used to run the Traditional Acupuncture Society journal, and then a few of us got together as part of this merging of the different schools into one of that was EJOM, European. So anyway, I come from a family that has always had some connection to herbal medicine. My father grew herbs, so I always wanted to be a herbalist in a way. But there were no schools of herbal medicine in Germany. There were schools where you could do like lots of different things, but I wanted to be a herbalist. So as part of that process, I ended up in the UK, because in the UK there was a school of herbal medicine, school of phytotherapy in Tunbridge Wells at that time. But they offered a part-time course, and I thought I needed to do something else, and by luck and circumstance I ended up doing Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and again, I didn't know anything about acupuncture at that time. I ended up in Jack Worsley's school in Leamington Spa, for better or for worse. And then from there I discovered that there's something called Chinese herbal medicine. So I studied Chinese herbal medicine at that time with Giovanni Maciocia and Ted Kapchuk when they ran that course. And at that time, actually in the UK, I mean, I don't know how much people know about that, there was something called the acupuncture wars. Different schools of acupuncture all claiming that they represented the true Chinese medicine. And I thought I had to figure out what the true Chinese medicine was. Also at that time, this is kind of like the late 80s. I had been involved in Chinese medicine by then for almost 10 years. But to me, the Chinese medicine lacked academic, it lacked something else that I've always been interested in thinking, and some kind of academic rigor. So I went back into academia, and I ended up doing a PhD. At that time, for various reasons, initially I thought I should do sinology, but I couldn't because I already had a practice, and going to London to do that was too complicated. Anyway, I ended up doing a PhD in medical anthropology, which turned out to be a really good choice for me. And I went to China in 1994 for my fieldwork. So doing a study of, I wanted to figure out what the real true Chinese medicine was. And I did that in the course of that was the ambition of my PhD. But I always like to combine the kind of like various things into one, kill a few birds with one stone. So I did my fieldwork in China, actually in hospitals of Chinese medicine. So studying with doctors of Chinese medicine, I thought I could figure out what the real Chinese medicine was, but also was a real good clinical training for me. And I discovered that there is no real Chinese medicine, that many doctors do different things. They have ways of communicating with each other and talking with each other. They have ways of disagreeing with each other. And I wrote my first book, academic book, called Plurality and Synthesis, Chinese Medicine in Contemporary China. It's in a way a little bit of a history of Chinese medicine from 1949 onwards until then, which was kind of the late 1990s. Obviously, things have moved on since then. So it's kind of like a history of that period, but also, which is not so interesting for practitioners, but it's interesting for academics to have find a framework for thinking about what Chinese medicine is and how we can think about that diversity and plurality. Because I think from our nature or from our culture, we always crave system. We crave some kind of coherence. Yes, Chinese medicine has to, not just Chinese medicine, Western medicine or homeopathy or whatever, politics. Everything has to be a thing. It has to be well defined. So that's why we first learn theory, and then we turn the theory into practice. But as you know, you studied a little bit in China, sometimes you start with the practice, and there is no real theory sometimes even behind it. But it's not just empiricism either, yes? It's kind of like this mutant thing. And for us as Westerners, I think it takes some time to get our heads around this. So in my academic work, I've always, one of my kind of red thread that goes through my academic work is to try and find, for us Westerners, to think about this difference. So having done my PhD, for me, even so I've now looking back, so this is like by the time I had my PhD, is like the late 1990s, and I kept I had a practice throughout my PhD, so it was quite busy and stressful at times. It was always clear to me that I always saw myself as a practitioner first and foremost. So various times in my life I had the choice to go for a full-time academic career, kind of like pretty good places I could have gone to. But that would have meant, giving up my practitioner side of things. And I always knew that was a no-no. So in a certain way I thought, because it's very difficult to have a foot in academia if you're not full-time.
I think that's one thing that's incredibly interesting about you, Volker, is because of the two hats that you have, the practitioner and the academic hat. And you're being humble in saying that I understand you didn't pursue a full-time academic career, but
incredibly lucky.
Your output's have been quite significant.
I've been incredibly lucky. Like lots of things, it was a particular time. For instance, a particular time. So when after I did my PhD, I was lucky enough. I got some funding for postdoc, and I had to, because of the funding opportunities, I had to go from anthropology into history of medicine. So I've had lots of luck in my life. I ended up, so I'd done my PhD on contemporary Chinese medicine, and I had gotten to know some teachers. And as I was preparing I was thinking, what should I do for this history, for this history postdoc? What should be my research question? I came across, in another person's PhD, I came across a lineage of doctors, these people from Menghe that I wrote Menghe is a small place in southern China from which loads of famous doctors came at a certain period in time. And in this footnote, in this other person's history, I found a connection between what she called the Menghe doctors to my teachers. So I thought, that's very interesting. Maybe I can trace a history of China through this particular of Chinese medicine through this particular lineage, which is what I ended up doing. And just again by fortune, it turned out that this particular, I don't like to use the term lineage. It's better a group of doctors who studied with each other. Initially, I thought it is like a medical lineage. So they all share a certain way of practicing. And anyway, I thought I could trace the history of Chinese medicine through these doctors. And I did that. But again, I found even so they all connect to each other in different ways, master-disciple, family membership, or then so this particular group of doctors, I can trace it back to 1626, when the first person in one of the big families starts to become a doctor. So I can trace it from 1626 to the present. Sometimes, like in this particular family, it's a 13th generation of unbroken practice. So it's a family lineage. But they also had people, say, from other families or simply students come in, study with them. One of the people who studied with them, not in any kind of formal way, but peripherally, he ended up going to China, to Shanghai in the late 19th century, and he became the most famous doctor in Shanghai in the early 20th century, and he set up a school in Shanghai in 1916. That's Ding Gan Ren.
Yeah.
Set up a school in 1916, which trained loads and loads of very famous people like Qin Bo Wei, for instance. Yes, okay, very, very famous people, very, very influential people in the history of Chinese medicine, who then would go on, like for instance Qin Bo Wei, but also Cheng Menxue. Cheng Menxue is he became the first president of the Shanghai University of Chinese Medicine. Huang Wendong, who was the second president of. Then loads of people went to the Academy of Chinese Medicine in Beijing. Yes, okay. Some people from there, they went to the person who got state registration for acupuncture in New York, comes from that lineage, and even not from that group, let's call it group, not lineage, yes, okay? And even Dr. Shen, like famous from Dr. John Shen, yes, who very, very influential on Chinese medicine in the UK, teaching, he taught Giovanni, and he came to London once.
If you listen to Cinzia's talk, interview, she talked about John Shen as being influential.
He came, had a very big impact. There's also an interview, I think, by on the Geological podcast by Julian Scott, and he also talks about that seminal weekend seminar of Dr. John Shen. And as luck would have it, I got to know John Shen had studied at Ding Gan Ren's college, and when I was just about finishing my second fieldwork, that historical fieldwork, he came back to China to die. And I got to know the people. I knew the people he had come back to. So the last interview on this thing I did with John Shen. So it was kind of like a closing of the circle. Yeah. So it was very. But again, initially when I started that research, I thought, okay, this is a group of doctors called Menghe people. I must discover what holds them together in terms of their clinical practice. But actually nothing holds them together in terms of their clinical practice.
Well, actually, that's something I wanted to highlight, because that book you mentioned, Plurality and Synthesis, which also, by the way, is a fantastic exploration of development of TCM as well, isn't it? And I think for that reason, it's very interesting to practitioners, because to see how TCM came together. But just this concept of plurality, I mean, on a personal level, I've always wanted things to fit together. I've always felt like I need things to fit together. By the way, excuse the thunderstorm in the background, but anyway. And I initially found this concept of plurality, the idea that in the history of Chinese medicine, maybe some things don't fit together, and that's okay. I found that quite challenging. But working with you and learning from you, I realized how much richer my thinking has become by being comfortable with that. And also, I think, in our community, this is something that's really important that we have to deal with, is that we may have differing opinions which don't fit together, and that's also okay. And we can embrace that. So I just wondered if you might want to say a few words about plurality and how that's been one of the through lines between you in your research.
I mean, it's challenging not just for you, also for me. Yes, okay. It's like but as I explained before at the beginning, I really wanted to find what's the true thing. Yes, and then when I did the research on Menghe, which led to a second book, which is called Currents of Tradition, which is a history of Chinese medicine from early 17th century to the present, to John Shen, through this particular group of doctors. Again, I thought, okay, there is something, you know, they are a lineage of doctors, yeah, but no, and not they. The best we can say is they know each other, and they study with each other, and they learn from each other. But there are many, you know, if you read the book, there are many different stories in there for why people sometimes want to be the same as their teacher. But for instance, in the Ding family, take that, you know, so this is Ding Ganren, the most famous doctor of Chinese medicine in Shanghai at a certain point. So some people really want to be his student because it's good for them, yes? But one of his sons or grandsons makes it his job to be not like him, because he's like the third. The top guys already are like him, so he needs to distinguish himself, yes? Okay, if he wants to make a career, he cannot be like Ding Ganren, yes? So he purposefully chooses a guy from northern China, totally the opposite in a way, yes, okay, very different, and people in his family call him the revolutionary in the family, yes, so he purposely wants to be different, yes, so he's different because he's associated with the north, but also Ding Ganren is very kind of like small dosage guy, he then becomes a big dosage guy, you know, Ding Ganren is more like continuity with the past. He becomes very much like assimilating Western medicine to Chinese medicine. So they become so there are psychological reasons.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. But again, then Ding Ganren, for instance, because he comes from a kind of like small family, and he studies with this big family. In the big family in Menghe is a family called Fei. Yes, and they have been around for 500 years. They are the big dogs in town. And Ding Ganren, he studies with them peripherally, yeah, okay? But he's not acknowledged by them as like, this is our successor, yes, okay? But he goes to Shanghai where they are not famous, but everybody knows there are famous doctors in Menghe. So he says, oh, we are the famous doctors from Menghe, does that make sense? Yes. And also Ding Ganren, early in his career, he messes up. He treats the child of a very famous person, influential person, and he messes up the treatment. So then he becomes a bit cautious. So some of his low dosage approach comes from his earlier treatment failure. And one of his best, this is also really interesting, so one of his best friends is another doctor called Cao Yingfu. Cao Yingfu is one of the main Shanghanlun doctors in Shanghai at that time. He comes from the next village. He comes actually from the town where Huang comes from. And if you read around, the people who are interested in Shanghan at the moment, they know Cao Yingfu. And Stephen Clavey has just published a translation of Cao Yingfu's cases. So Cao Yingfu has a very different background. He comes from a very elite family. He didn't study medicine when he was young. He only turned to become a doctor because when they abolished the old-style civil service examinations in 1919, he had to look for a new job. He became a doctor. And he's very classically orientated, so he becomes what we would nowadays call a Jingfang guy, yes? Yeah. Okay? So he's a Jingfang person. And he uses large dosages, yes? Okay, and he says, so when Ding Ganren dies, they publish a series of his case histories. And his friends and students, everybody who is somebody in Shanghai is the center of the Chinese medicine world in China at that time, yes, okay? Anybody all the famous doctors are in Shanghai. And they all write forwards to his series of case histories, you know, saying, what a great guy. And Cao Yingfu writes this forward and says, Ding Ganren was a really great guy, but he used too low dosages. Yes, and for a friend in a book like that to say something like that is kind of like almost unheard of. But that shows how good friends they were. Does that make sense? Yes. So you have like a guy who is like more from a Wenbing tradition, low dosage guy. Yes. Okay. And then you have this more from a medical family. He's not a scholar. And then you have this other guy who is a scholar. Who learns medicine late in his life, becomes a Jingfang person uses Hai, they clash about how to treat, but they're fantastic friends and they exchange with each other, you know, and they are such good friends that they can do that in, you know, imagine like somebody says, I really don't like Machocha, do you know what, and writes it in the forward to Machocha's book, yeah?
But I mean, but it is great to see that, you know, there is a history. There's a history of great enmity with people as well, but there's also a history of people acknowledging the differences and being comfortable with it at the same time, which is, you know, something which I think we can learn from.
I think that's something I found often, you know, like really, that's a recurrent theme I found in my research. You know, where I thought these people, they cannot have gotten on with each other because they are so different in their perception of where Chinese medicine should go, or what they are about. Like I remember, there's again in Shanghai in the 1920s, 30s, people divided very much. The big question was, how should Chinese medicine reform so it becomes part of modern China? Yes, so people had very different opinions about it. Yes, some people said, oh, it should whole-scale westernize. Other people said it should stay very traditional. Other people started to find a middle ground, and again, I don't need to mention more names because then it gets too confusing, but a doctor who is really the leading person of the most radical reformers. Yes, he wants to make a radically modern Chinese medicine built on Japanese model. Yes, built on a Campo model. Yes, okay. Actually, he says in China we have lost Chinese medicine. The real Chinese medicine now is in Japan. Mm-hmm. Japan was a model at that time, yes, okay, for these radical reformers. And then you have people in the Ding family who are like much more conservative, want to contend. And I thought, these people, and then I talked with the great-grandson of Ding, and I said, hey, well, that guy came to us for dinner all the time, you know, my father and him, they were fantastic friends, you know, that's, and what the other thing we forget, these people, I mean, the other thing that I have learned about maybe not modern Chinese medicine doctors like now, but up until that time, until kind of like 1949, they were very cultured people.
Yeah.
And being cultured people, maybe you know that still from your teacher in Japan, they were not just doctors, they were also like, they might be Buddhists, or they might be painters, or they might do a bit of music on the side, and that all flows into what they're doing. And as you also know, in Chinese thinking, you don't always have to be so totally coherent, isn't it? Yes, it's okay to have these gray zones and gray areas. And I think that's something for, you know, there's disadvantages to that. I really am very happy that I grew up in Germany and that I'm a kind of like a son of the Enlightenment. You know, like very specifically, I'm happy to be a son of the German Enlightenment, which is a bit different from yours in the UK. I'm very happy that I came to the UK and came to an Anglo-Saxon country and really learned about a way of having to think in academia, think very clearly in a way that we don't do in Germany. So I'm really happy about that. But I'm also happy that I had this exposure to Chinese thinking, which is, you know, like as you said before, being happy with that diversity. That's for me, that was a learning experience, you know, like a lifetime journey as well. And I know that lots of people don't like it. I remember Giovanni was very unhappy with me, yes, because, I mean, I think there are different reasons for it, because we identify, you know, like part of our identity is like, I do this, you know, like I'm a Jingfang person, or I'm a 5-element practitioner, yes, okay? Or I'm a biomedical doctor, I do science, I don't do this Chinese medicine stuff, yes, okay? But again, Chinese medicine really shows it, like when science, biomedicine came to China in the 1920s, 30s, a lot of these Chinese doctors had no problem, or even now, you know, like if you read Eric Karchmer's book on Chinese medicine in contemporary China, it's called what is it called, virtuosity, something with virtuous prescribing or something. He shows how these people, how these doctors in modern China try to work at the boundary of Western medicine. Maybe they don't always understand Western medicine even properly. They have a certain background in Chinese medicine. Sometimes they fail, sometimes it works, but they take that risk of trying to, you know, they don't say you have to be either that or that. Of course, in China nowadays, because China, you know, like not just in China, everywhere in the world, I think we have to be careful, very careful, particularly us as Chinese medicine practitioners, to kind of misunderstand China or idolize the East. Yes, okay? China is China has modernized. So China nowadays has assimilated into its own culture a lot of what we as historians would call modernity. That means even though they are modern people as well as Chinese people, in the same way modern as we are. So for them, the difference between science and non-science is as real as for us.
Yeah.
The difference between science and non-science.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the level of being modern people, everywhere, whether you're in Jordania or in China or in Chile or in the UK, it's the same. Yeah, because we are all modern, and in modernity we create. Like one of the reasons we have struggled with that is because modernity creates these divisions.
Well, on that point,
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is your work and your ideas about the body, because you could say potentially there was a bit of a false dichotomy created about the body in Chinese medicine along those lines, with that layer of modernity.
Or the body between, there's a Western medicine body and there's a Chinese medicine body. Yes, or Chinese, actually, the way you will find it dichotomized is Western medicine treats the physical body and Chinese medicine treats the energetic body, or however you want to call it, yes? And that's like that's a very modern dichotomy, so you can separate one from the other, but it's, I think, the worst dichotomy for us as practitioners. And it's totally untrue, because obviously we as Chinese medicine practitioners treat the same body that you treat in biomedicine, isn't it? Yes, okay? We just look at it differently. One of the ways you could look at, I read a nice paper yesterday, and in the paper he comes up with a nice term, numismatic. Numismatic refers to a coin. A coin has two sides, but it's the same coin. When you look at the coin from this side, it looks like that. It has one thing on it. When you look at the coin from the other side, it has got something else on it, but it's the same coin. You cannot have the coin without the other thing. So biomedical way of looking at the body and Chinese medicine way of looking at the body is actually, in that way, we could say numismatic. It's the same body. And so first of all, I think we should get away from that separation. And also history. I know a lot of practitioners, because I've been teaching a lot of practitioners, not in England so much. I've done most of my teaching in Germany, so I have kind of like, most people in England think, oh, he's just like a historian, he doesn't know what he's doing as a practitioner. In Germany, everybody knows me as a practitioner, they don't know me as a historian, yes, okay? So that's how life is. But going back to the body, yes, okay? So one good thing about history for me, and I think it could be for us as a profession, history explains to us how things come about. So at a certain point in the history of Chinese medicine, because in the 1920s and 30s, but in the 20s, Chinese medicine suddenly found itself, it had to compete with Western medicine. It never had to do that before. Chinese medicine used to be the top dogs in China, yeah, okay? There were other ways of doing medicine, like Buddhist monks or itinerant herb peddlers, but they were lower down on the social scale. Chinese medicine was the elite medicine, isn't it, yes? However, then Western medicine comes along and says, we have the best understanding of the human organism. And they could show that through anatomy. And it became very clear that Chinese understanding of the body via anatomy was not as good as Western. And also Western medicine, they could do surgery. And Chinese medicine couldn't do that. And it was based on their anatomical understanding, yes? Okay? This is before antibiotics. This is like, before Western medicine becomes... Yeah. So Chinese medicine, what does it do in order to compete? It cannot compete on the level of the body. Because how do you explain that the liver is on the left-hand side? When you do you understand, yes? How do you explain, people try, but how do you explain the Sanjiao when nobody can see it? How can you explain the Mingmen when it's just not there? Do you know what I mean? Yes. So Chinese medicine is in a kind of losing position if it does that. So what they do very, very, very cleverly, they abandon the body of flesh and blood. And you can show that it's like they abandon it. They say, okay, Western medicine is good at that. But we are very good at understanding process. And Western medicine is really bad at, and Western medicine is bad at, because they focus on structure. So they gain, they don't have to fight that battle anymore. They now can fight the battle really on the level of who is more effective. And again, remember, this is 1920s, this is before antibiotics. Chinese medicine is much more effective in treating, for everybody knew, in treating infectious diseases. Yes, okay, it's just better, yes, or at least as good. They're not good in doing surgery, so it was a very strategic move. But what happens usually after the next generation, it's forgotten that that was a strategic move. It's accepted as if that was the truth. Does that make sense? And then, of course, as Chinese medicine moves to the West, and for us the situation is very similar, we all know that the biomedical body is the real body. Yeah, okay, because we also grow up with it. We know that we go if we need to have heart surgery, we better go to a Western medicine hospital, isn't it? We know that biomedical anatomy is true. And at the same time, we have to make a space for, then we start learning Chinese medicine. So we learn about the spleen and the stomach, and we learn about the liver being on the left. So obviously, we don't think we mean the liver as an organ. So then we learn about what we call Chinese medicine is about process, it's about qi, it's about function, stuff like that, isn't it? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And then one of the ways you can see that, if you take, is Giovanni's text still the main text that people use in school, Foundations of Chinese Medicine?
I think from some colleges it will be an important one, yeah.
But if you look at the main texts that teach us the foundations of Chinese medicine, physiology and anatomy, you don't find any picture of the actual body in there, isn't it? Yes, you find loads of functional diagrams that show the liver does that to the spleen, or the kettle that is being boiled and stuff like that. Yes, but you don't have actually the body. Does it make sense? Yeah, like if you go back like to 17th century, I mean, of course the Chinese have depictions of the body. They were interested in the 11th century. They did a lot of these depictions of the body come from anatomical studies, not on the industrial scale that we did them after the 17th century. But the Sung Emperor in 1100, he had somebody do anatomical studies on people who had been executed. Yes, and that's where a lot of these pictures come from. So Chinese medicine is very, very clearly interested in the body of flesh and blood. And I have a colleague, Ili Wu, who was with me in Westminster.
She's a historian.
Historian, yeah. For a while I was running this institute at the University of Westminster. And she's bringing out a book on the history of the Chinese medicine body of flesh and blood.
Wow.
Because they had, some of the things Chinese medicine had to deal with was broken bones.
Yeah.
People having been punishment, like some of what's physical punishment, being flagellated and stuff like that. So they had they had wounds. They were punished by the government, but they were not allowed to die.
And Chinese medicine, obviously, she also goes into gynecology because there's a lot of blood in
there, yes,
gynecology.
And trauma.
But the level of fineness and nuance that's applied to kind of cataloging substances of the body and structures.
It's all there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are certain reasons, even before 1920s, why, particularly in Japan, people start to think not so much in terms of the body and flesh and blood, but they think more in terms of certain functional processes, let's call it like that. But the body of flesh and blood, like there are debates about where is the Mingmen. Some people say it's the right kidney, but it's not like an abstract thing. It's really, this is the right kidney. Or people will say it's a womb. So they will say it's a uterus. So it's a physical structure. So the debates about where the Mingmen is are not just abstract debates, but it's like, so realizing that there is that this dichotomy between the Western body and the Chinese body is not as real as we think it is, because also in Western medicine we of course think about function. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of teaching, at least, for me, the plurality of Chinese medicine is real. And to me, it's an asset. It's not a problem. To me, it's an asset. One of the things I learned is to turn it from a problem, like why, what is the real Chinese medicine? Why is it not systematic? That's the problem. Turn it around into an asset. So I have different ways of looking at the same problem. And that's a real asset, because they're almost like lenses. It's like the analogy I use is not like it's either I have to use this camera or I have to use that camera. The analogy I use is like the different lenses that you have in a lens. And like when you have a really good camera, you have these different lenses and you move them around until the object is in very clear focus. And the different ways of different, whether it's different ways of looking at the body or different traditions in Chinese medicine, they help me to bring the focus, which is the patient, bring the patient into clearer focus. So, as I'm also a teacher of Chinese medicine, I have to find strategies of like one of my tasks or one of my goals is nowadays in my teaching of Chinese medicine, how can I help others to work with these different perspectives constructively and actually be a better practitioner because I can do that. Not just because that's my lifestyle choice, but actually I think you become a better practitioner. And having taught now loads of people, I think that is validated by the results of doing that. I've taught lots of people who come from, I do this, like I'm a 5-element practitioner or I'm a Jingfang person, and then they invest time and energy in going through that process, and they tell me at the end, I get much better clinical results. So it's not my...
I mean, I would like to highlight this, and it's why I want to have a conversation with you, because I'm a Chinese medicine nerd. If you were just teaching anthropology and history, I'd still be here and enjoying the lectures. Yeah. But the way it actually flows tangibly into informing your practice, improving and sharpening the concepts that we have, being able to apply these different lenses, it leads to tangible outcomes. It leads to clearer thinking, which leads to some better outcomes. So it's not just a intellectual exercise. Yeah.
So having tried to figure out a way of how I can teach that, I ended up with this idea of the body multiple in Chinese medicine. So basically, again, when we learn Chinese medicine, we think, well, there is the Chinese medicine has one conception of the body. It's a Zhang Fu, it's channels, it's qi, 5 elements, whatever. And but if you start to break it all down, then you see there's one of 2 things happen. Either people pick out only one particular aspect of that, like say 5 element acupuncturist in the Worsley style. They only pick up this 5 element body I would call the cosmological body, because it's microcosm, macrocosm understood through 5 elements. Yes, okay? It's what I call the cosmological body. You don't need to explain, like wind comes from the outside, you don't need to explain how the wind produces a change. It's just like resonance, yes, okay? Or fire or earth or so. Like when, for instance, but they only do that. And it allows you to do certain things, but it doesn't allow you to do other things. So when I had to think about how I can find a way to help people to be comfortable with this difference, I came up with this idea of the body multiple in Chinese medicine. It's actually not my invention. It comes from a very famous anthropologist called Annemarie Moll. And maybe it's actually interesting to say what Annemarie Moll meant by that. Annemarie Moll is an anthropologist. She did research in a biomedical hospital in Holland, where they were treating people who had cardiovascular problems due to diabetes. And she found out that the different people in the hospital who were responsible for the care of these diabetic patients were looking at the body in different ways, even within the same institution. So the doctor who was trying to regulate the blood sugar, he was only interested in the blood sugar, in that kind of stuff. And the person who was interested in the blood vessels, he was interested in the rheology and the picture of how does the blood vessel look if I make it visible. And the nurse who was responsible for dealing with the open wound, she didn't care about blood sugar. She was interested in, was it infected, wasn't it not infected, does the person need antibiotics, or how often do they need to have, what's the real flesh and blood here, yes, okay? So, actually, this, and it's in an institution, yes, okay, and what Margaret Moll says, we have multiple ways of looking at it, but not unlimited ways. There is, for instance, no homeopathy in there, because homeopathy doesn't make any sense to help these people in this particular context, yes? If you would put homeopathy in, the whole institution would change. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at Chinese medicine like as if it was an institution, yes, okay? So then also we have in Chinese medicine different types of bodies. So for instance, one of the bodies, and then I start, what kind of bodies do we actually work in? And we work with, most of us work with different of these bodies, and we mix them up without thinking about it. Some of us only work with one body, or emphasize just one body, yes, okay? So, like, one of the bodies I call the cosmological body. That's a body of like five elements, the kind of microcosmic, macrocosmic body, where we think the body is really like a microcosm of the nature around it. So our goal of treatment would be to make the microcosm resonate with the macrocosm. Yes, okay, so that in the summer we are like summer, in the winter we are like winter, that kind of stuff. Yes,
correspondences.
Yeah. And the kind of logic of how that body is affected is by resonance. Yes, the wind outside does something to the liver inside. We don't have to explain anatomically how that happens. It's just that kind of logic.
Yeah, you could say that one acupuncture point has a fire quality or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so it treats it. So that's one body. And then there is another body, for instance, is the body of the channels, And these bodies are connected to it because you can look at the channels through cosmology, but channels are also imagined as structures. Channels through which things flow. Qi, or depending on how you think of channels, blood, yes? Okay, stuff flows through these channels. Now, what is the important thing that we have to do to that kind of body? We have to keep the channels open. So we tong. So like we say, tong zi bu tong zi tong bu tong. Yes, okay, if the channel is not open, then we have pain. So what you need to do to get rid of the pain, you have to open the channel.
Yeah.
Now, opening the channel is a very different thing, like selecting that point because it's an earth point.
Yeah.
And often, you know, if you want to do it for an earth point, you don't need to manipulate very much because you have chosen the point because it's an earth point, isn't it? Yes. Whereas if you want to tong, these people often put a lot of emphasis on people having a sensation of flow through the channel or doing something here, that it does something there. So it's a different way of engaging with the same body, with the same tools, isn't it? Yes? Okay, so that's the second body. Then you have a third body, which is maybe not so important in acupuncture practice, but it's very important in herbal medicine practice. That's what I call a topographic body, where we don't think of the Zhang Fu or the channel so much, but we think of particular body regions. So you have an exterior. So we have the boundaries of the body to the outside world, and we look at how things, these boundaries have to be strong to defend, to separate us from the outside world, but they also have to be open to let things flow in. And if these boundaries don't function properly, we get certain kind of problems. So we would call that in Chinese medicine Tai Yang, yeah, or the exterior. Yes, okay. And what we do when we do Tai Yang kind of stuff, we regulate the permeability or the strengths of what's happening in that exterior. And then we have other places like half interior, half exterior, that's a territorial body. And what I would call territorial body. And usually when we think of, it's very clear, if you look at the texts that deal with that body, the medicine we use there is a military medicine. It's about defeat, things that shouldn't be in a certain place need to be pushed out. Enemies come in, they need to be defeated.
And that's interesting with the Ying Qi, for example, often translated as nutritive Qi, but it can also be camp Qi, because it's military camp.
Military camp,
Qi.
Or defensive Qi, yes, okay? And the language is always, also in the case history is about encircling an enemy, going in there, pushing an enemy out, like cold has penetrated into the body, it needs to be pushed out, or heat has come into the body, has pushed out. So this is military medicine. We always say medicine is about balancing the body with, creating a harmony between the interior and the human macrocosm. That's about harmony. But that medicine is not about harmony. That's about making people perspire, purging them, isn't it? Yes, making them sweat, urinate, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's much more herbal medicine because it's very difficult to make somebody purge somebody with acupuncture. Yes?
Although I know I definitely have encountered styles that engage with acupuncture on that level.
But it comes from herbs.
I think it comes from herbs, and you'll get as you know you'll get practitioners from history who will accompany some of their herbal things with acupuncture points and
But simply, if you look, that's my opinion. Simply, if you look at it, you give somebody Da Huang. It purges everybody. Do you know what I mean? Yes, it's just like a purging thing.
Yes,
but there's no needle where you can twiddle it in everybody and everybody will have a bowel movement. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think that you can obviously then retro-engineer it, but I think there's different.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I think there's that body, yes? And then there's a body that I call the vital body. That's when we talk about things like qi and blood, what we would call in Western medicine physiology. How different things are, how we take food in and make it into what we call blood or essence, and then how essence transforms into and different types of qi. So this has much more to do not with microcosm, that has much more to do with the process of transformation and physiological processes.
And that will map onto the kind of flow charts we see in TCM
Very
with
much so.
qi production and blood production, all those kind of things. Yeah.
With the proviso that for me, that's why I call it the physiological body. All of these things are bodies.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Yes? So when we talk about the cosmological body, microcosm, macrocosm, and we say our joints feel achy when it's damp, we still feel the relationship between the macrocosm, microcosm. We only know about it because we feel it in our bodies. It's not abstract. Yeah. It's real. Yeah? The wind hitting me. That's not a diagram. Yeah. That's real. Yeah. Yes? It's a certain way of how our bodies resonate with the environment.
Yes.
And it's just in Chinese language constructed through this cosmological thinking, isn't it? Yes? You know, if we deal with the channels, you know, again, I mean, the simplest would be blood vessels. Blood stasis, there's something where our blood vessels don't tongue.
Yeah.
But as we also now learning from Western medicine, you know, like connective tissue, there's other flows in our body. Osteopaths are really good at feeling a lot of flows in our body, yes? So this is also a real, it's not like imagined, yes? The same as the physiological processes. For me, again, when I teach, I think it's really important not just to leave it at the level of the diagrams, because one of the problems of having a diagram is that anybody can make any claim. So the qi goes into, the nutritive qi goes into the heart and turns red and becomes blood. Yeah, that's a sentence. Everybody can say that, and it sounds good, and then you have understood, but no, explain to me, please. It's about the body. You know, how does the heart turn the blood red? So I think if we always link it to the body, it forces us to become much more clearer about how does that happen. Now, in this particular instance, for instance, if we think that the small intestine is the heart, then we have a way of imagining that nutritive qi goes from the stomach. Do you know what I mean? Yes?
Yeah.
Into the heart, small intestine.
Yeah.
And is transformed into something new. Does it make sense? Yeah. So then we have a better way of actually looking at, you know, and then we see, if you look at a lot of the formulas that treat the small intestine, they all have to do with blood and blood stasis. And it starts to link.
And part of your work has been looking at a number of really interesting Qing dynasty thinkers and physicians
who think like that.
Who think like that.
Yeah.
And they often get overlooked. I mean, partly because of just the enormous scope of history. You can only read so much, but there's been a bit of a favor towards older texts. And, you know, so a little bit in the West, maybe all over, I think that there's been, these
Chinese
interesting
medicine,
thinkers have been overlooked. Yeah.
Because in Chinese medicine, we always orient ourselves towards the past. You know, like the Jing, the classics are always, and obviously, you know, we live in a, for us as Chinese medicine practitioners, we have a very difficult stance in our culture, isn't it? Yes. Okay, we are not, as we all know, not everybody believes in Chinese, and we get a lot of flack from certain kinds. So I think emotionally, and in terms of our own identity, you know, like going back to this past, and also to this idea, you know, the idea that Chinese medicine is complex and complicated and driven by internal divisions and debates, that then makes it even worse for us, because then we have internal debates and we are pressurized from the outside. So I think retreating into this safe world of either Chinese medicine is one thing, or the safe world that in the Han Dynasty that was the authentic Chinese medicine, or this is the, do you know what I mean? It just gives us, however, because the other thing, as you say, is accepting the plurality is more challenging, and it also feels, it adds another level of challenge, you know, like that makes it difficult, yes, okay? And it's a journey to engage with it. However, my feeling is that once you engage with it, you actually come out at the other end much, much stronger. You can deal with the diversity in Chinese medicine. You can deal, you know, I feel pretty comfortable dealing with engaging with any kind of perspective from the broad history of Chinese medicine, and coming out of that engagement having learned something. It doesn't mean I have to accept everything, but I'm pretty happy that most of those engagements, if there's something new in Chinese medicine that I haven't come across, I always learn something. There's always something new. It's never challenging. Does it make sense? Yes, it's not like, it doesn't challenge my identity. Maybe there's, even if it's only this herb is useful, or I've never thought about this point like that, yeah, okay? So it does that. And it also doesn't, I feel also, but that's my own personal thing, I feel very, I make a connection between the ability to, or the desire to embrace different positions. I think that's something that goes beyond the clinical. I think that's important for us in our time, because lots of our problems in this world come from trying to us and them and not having the middle. And if you think of Chinese medicine, what the other philosophically, what Chinese medicine can teach us, not as practitioners, but could teach the wider world, is in Chinese medicine you always want to emphasize the middle. And there's many different ways of how we can think about the middle, but one of the ways we can think about the middle is, and there's reasons I say this now, I could go for a long philosophical debate, but we always talk about ping, like ping balance. And herb balance, yes, okay? And we want to create balance in our patients, yes, in the world, in ourselves. So we use this idea of, the idea is of course a scale, and we have that in those initial textbooks, isn't it, where we have the yin and the yang, yes, okay? But the important place of a scale is a central point. If you don't have that central point, you cannot have this. And the central point is like, here's one opinion and here's another opinion. But the central point means they have to share something. They have to come to, does it make sense? Yes? Yeah. There has to be something that brings these different opinions together to be even on the same scale. Does that make sense? Yes?
Well, maybe that's a nice place to end it, because I very much feel strongly about this in terms of our community. That I think that, to say a cliche, but diversity is our strength in terms of
100%.
the different approaches that people have. But it's also important for us to feel a sense of common purpose, because ultimately our values are the same. Yeah. And the thing that we want to achieve is the same. And finding a space where we can come together and respect the differences. We don't always have to agree, but just to find the benefit we can have from coming together, and that moderate space, as you say, the central space, I think is fantastic. So thanks very much, Volker. It's really been inspiration learning from you. Thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you. And thanks for trying to make it happen in our profession. I really appreciate that. Yeah?
Great. Okay. Thanks.